interesting that already this morning I've been working for an hour on my next book, which is on the secular society and secular culture, and the result of that for religious education. I want to start off just by saying why I think it's just so very, very important and so difficult now for schools and for parents. Because there's a new word in the Oxford English Dictionary, and it is that of post-truth. And Jonathan Sacks, in his very, very good book, recently published, called Morality, gives some very good accounts of what he calls the post-truth society. And the post-truth society is you know what you want to be true, and then you use every conceivable device to persuade people that it is true through the language that you use, and also through the social media and everything. And I think we are now very much likely to become the victims of a social media that is part of the post-truth society. And I think, therefore, in pursuing this particular discussion today, one of the very real problems I'm sure you're all very familiar with is the role of social media in shaping how children and youths and so on think and come to certain positions, and how one can deal with that educationally in our schools, and indeed in life in general. One sees, for example, in the reports on the riots in Bristol, how much of that was due to the social media from certain groups stirring up the sort of problems. One sees it at the moment in Northern Ireland. So there's a very real educational task for society to be able to enable young people to wade through all that which invades their minds through social media, etc., to be able to think seriously in terms of evidence and in terms of argument and so on, what is the truth in the post-truth society. I think this is not just for children, not just for ordinary grown-ups. I think it is for politicians. The more one reads the debates about key issues that are being confronted in Parliament and by our political leaders, you realize how little there is there in what you and I think would call proper debate, proper considering the evidence, arriving at conclusions, often sensitively and carefully in the light of the difficulties of justifying what it is that one is doing. And so I think in terms of the post-media, social media, in terms of the political dogma, which we're getting very often without proper evidence, without looking at things, that we ought to be very careful in enabling young people through discussion and through debate to use language very carefully. I think that also when you've got now in the classrooms the children from different ethnic groups and different faiths and so on, it's most important that one is able to engage in a discussion in which they will be able to explore these different views. There's a report which has just come out quite a bit ago from the Commission for Religious Education, the Religious Education Report, which talks about the development of world views in the classroom. And if that goes ahead, and if in place of religious education there would be world views, then it's very important that one is able to discuss these world views objectively, without any hostility, trying to see the good that is in them before one criticizes. So I want to give 3 real examples of what I'm talking about. And the first example is the work that I did many years ago But when I was teaching in a school in South Oxford, it was a school which served an area with a great deal of social problems, unemployment and so on, because of the closure of the motor works, which employed so many of the people in that area. So it was a school that had many children who were coming from very difficult, economically difficult, socially difficult homes. And the brilliant head teacher of that school put at the center of the teaching, right the way through the school, debate and discussion. The children, despite often their disadvantaged backgrounds and so on, were taught how to start a discussion, the rest of the class not interrupting. If they had a point to make, an objection to make, they had to put up their hand and they would give them permission by the teacher. And I was amazed when I heard children coming in with particular problems that they had, social problems, difficulties, and how the children had learnt to be able to be silent and to listen, not to make fun, not to be hostile, not to interrupt, but then learnt how to raise questions which the speaker would try to answer, but if it couldn't, they get help from other people in the class and so on. Now, I was absolutely bewildered. I never realized this could be taught in that school. And it was a policy right the way through the school. And the school also organized a little coffee lounge where parents could come any time to have coffee, possibly see a teacher if necessary, but in which there was a real connection between school and family. I bring that. The children had been trained not to interrupt. They could make suggestions. They could ask for evidence. They could ask for the shared reading in the discussion. And I saw that happen. And it remains, all these years later, 30 years later, prominent in my mind. A second example, which I want to give, is a thing called classroom debates. This a small but working book has been written by one James Honeybone, who was a teacher at Bicester Community School in Oxfordshire, and is now retired. And he developed this whole program of what was classroom debates for 10 to 18-year-olds. That once again is operated right the way through the school. It's been published now by, I can give you the publishers thing, it's 3 Score Publishing Limited, 2020 and 21, by Peter Clifton. He is the publisher. And I'll give you the details at the very end if you want them. In the classroom debates, it's intended for class teachers of these 10 to 18-year-olds. It's a compact handbook. It outlines a tested method for running relevant, skill-enhancing discussions of contemporary issues and building their confidence and respect for the young people. There are rules of procedure which are explained, and this goes right the way through the school, enabling the role of the moderator, the teacher, as the provider of material for discussion, is described and drawing on 4 decades of experience. Now, Jim Honeybone gives an outline of his teaching career and explains this and working in a mixed comprehensive schools. This is not about school or political debates with their long tradition of confrontation and so on. In a world of more confrontational politics and fake facts, polarized refusal to listen to counter-arguments, people need, and the young people need, to be trained to develop respect that listens, and the book shows the way to achieve it. So, accepting truth, mutual respect and tolerance have to be learnt. They have to be learnt together with an interest in this wider world. Anna Bowen's book shows how reaching an opinion to the peers can become a real pleasure. And once again, I've seen that happening, and it's something which now permeates the whole of that school. So Jim, really, progressively through his long career, he taught his pupils to consider issues, both trivial and serious, in a way that brings them into the wider society for which they are being prepared, and got them there in an atmosphere of openness, respect for facts, and respect for the views of others, and therefore produced what he calls the class debate sheets. Things like LGBT claims, the pro-hunting march through London, parents to be barred from hitting children. All these are issues which are there very carefully debated in class under very, very strict rules of how to discuss. And the third example, which I really want to refer to, is this book on world views that I have the report, the Commission's report, in which they say, really now, we ought to replace religious education in schools with a thing called world views. We come to learn from diversity, from coming to understand what Muslims really say and think and how they feel about religion, how the Jews do, how the various religious bodies, the different Christian bodies, to listen carefully about their views of religion and religious worship, liturgies, and so on. We come to respect that. I have to say, in my own life, the more I have come to appreciate other religions, the more I find my own religious understanding has developed through respect for other people. I spent quite a bit of time in Pakistan, in Karachi, working for the Aga Khan University. And there, one of the things, although of course come from a Christian background, Christian practicing background, I just felt inspired by the call to prayer, by the devotion of these Muslim people as they came and with so much devotion, worship and so on. And I just think that one has got to develop that capacity for people to appreciate and deepen their own religious faith through appreciating other people's. So those are the three examples I want to give. The school for primary children in Oxford, the class debates that's now being developed, I hope, around the country, and indeed the ways in which I think religious education is changing to be much more positive about the way in which religion affects different people in different ways and how we need to come to appreciate that. So really, by way of conclusion, I just hope that you'll be able to discuss today how we can encourage amongst young people at different ages that the pursuit of the truth and not the creation of the truth in a post-truth society is what we should be striving at. That means mutual respect for each's idea, even if we disagree with them, but helping them to formulate those ideas. But also, in coming to conclusions, important truth requires the production of evidence. What's the evidence for the statements that you are making? All this, be able to do that, seeking evidence, mutual respect, pursuit of the truth, plus an interest in the wider world, is really what I think we ought to be teaching at every level of education, almost like a separate subject on the syllabus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. That was...
Could you hear it clearly?
Yes, that was really enriching, and I think absolutely key to the debate today. I'm really, really grateful for you giving that keynote lecture, which really does make us think very carefully about the kind of conditions we need to create for giving and receiving understanding, and to really listen to one another deeply. I'm going to now...
Could I just add one thing? What I found very important then when I was teaching in a secondary school, comprehensive school in London, and in charge of the final form, which was in that final form because they had no examinations to take. They were the early leavers, and they were a mixed bunch. The idea of getting them to engage in this conversation, that rearranging the furniture of the classroom, as they did in that primary school where I first learned about these things. In other words, sit round in a sort of semicircle, so that you don't have people right at the very back, or when people speak, everybody can actually hear them speaking, see them, and help them in that sort of way. I think the physical arrangement of a classroom is very, very important in order to encourage that kind of conversation, that sort of debating, that kind of thinking what other people have to say about things.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. Before we move on to the discussion, Richard, we have about another 10 minutes. Would you be willing to take questions from the delegates?
Yes, certainly.
Okay.
Can I just ask?
Did you raise your hand on the system and let us know if you have any questions for Professor Richard Pring? So, Mayamin, would you like to unmute yourself? You're on mute at the moment.
Brilliant. Hello.
We still can't hear you. You're still on mute, Mayamin.
I don't know what's going on today.
Mayamin, you're still on mute.
I'm awfully sorry.
It's you have to unmute.
Mayamin, we can't hear. Mayamin, could you unmute, please?
Brilliant. It's not from me. It's Mayssa's.
Mayssa, could you?
Now I'm on mute. Thank you very much, Mayssa. Thank you.
We can't hear her.
Okay. Now can you hear me now? Brilliant. Now can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. I don't know if any. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, thank you.
Waiting for. We can't hear Mayssa speak.
Yeah.
Oh, we can. Mayamin, we can't hear you speak. Oh, yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Okay. I think because we put everybody mute, so it was hard for us to unmute ourselves. Anyways, thank you very much, Richard. And it's lovely to hear you again. I don't know if you remember me, I met you twice at Leicester University. You came and spoke about two brilliant, now I'm looking at the photo that Alison shared, and I've got lots of photos that I have taken with you and with my colleagues and friends at Leicester University. And the question is how do we make children think that or respect each other's religions as teachers in the classrooms? It's very hard to do this, especially when parents have made them understand that their religion is the best one and the rest is not good or not good enough or it's not true. How can we empower these children to have that respect, to believe in each other's religion?
To believe. Sorry, what was the last sentence?
The last sentence is how can I help my students and make them aware that all the religions are all equal, we're all one. And because, you know, they are pushed by their parents and their parents make them understand that their religion is the best and the rest are wrong. How can I help them in the classroom to know this or to make them understand this?
Yes, I think I use the word, to respect other religions. So, for example, I, as a Christian, must believe in certain sort of things, which, say, a Muslim would not believe in. In other words, the divine nature of Jesus Christ. But at the same time, the more I look into this, and what I'm writing at the moment, certainly quite a lot on the Muslim faith, is there's a great deal in common. There's a belief in God. There's a certain views about the nature of God. In fact, if you look back in philosophy, the Christian philosophers, people like Aquinas and so on, were very much in tune with the Muslim philosophers and indeed the Jewish philosophers, all very much going back to Aristotle, etc. There's an enormous amount in common between, and therefore I think that although one has to recognize differences, those differences are differences within a certain sameness of belief in God, belief in afterlife, etc. So I think that one can have a profound respect for people with other religions and their beliefs, because there is a great deal in common, whilst at the same time recognizing that, of course, there are certain theological differences. I think, too, if you look at the way of life which would be encouraged by the different religions, then there would be, once again, much in common across the board. So I think that in that kind of comparative thing, one wants to see as much what is the sameness as indeed what are the differences. Now, I can certainly see that there might be certain difficulties amongst Christians, practicing Christians, if the Commission on Religious Education is implemented where they substitute world views rather than specific religious education, because those world views would also have to include secular views as well, so that people understand why some people don't believe in religion. So I think that there is a very delicate step to be taken here, but what I want to see is recognizing others people's views, having respect for them if they are well developed and they've got good reasons, whilst not necessarily agreeing with them all the way. And I think that is why there is a need for debate and understanding what other people believe, as opposed to just objecting to it. Hello?
Yes, Mayamin, does that answer your question? Thank you, Mayamin. Are there any other questions from the floor for Richard, who I think has just explained to us that we can agree to differ with the details of how we worship when there are all faiths and none, but that there are some very commonalities that are important. For example, how we treat one another. And Richard talked about respect. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to perhaps follow up on with that? I have a question for Richard, if there aren't any. Richard, do you think that there are any prime principles that you explore in your forthcoming book, which I'm excited to read, that may have some commonalities with all faiths and none, or is that something that we are still sort of looking to explore?
Well, there are commonalities. I mean, a great deal of the morality, the moral views put forward by secularists, have derived, I suppose, from religious traditions, as the religious traditions fail to have the same force that they had before. But there are a whole set of moral values that have evolved partly through those religious traditions. So there will always be that. But I mean, there is a certain common humanity. I think that what I find very interesting is that we now talk about education as part of human flourishing. So we all need to be asking, well, what constitutes being human? And what constitutes becoming more human? Developing those distinctive qualities that make us human beings. and those are obviously living a moral life and thinking through the moral proposition. But of course, there will be differences in terms of many moral principles depending upon those theological beliefs. But there's probably much more in common than is often from people who are thinking about how to live life and what it is to live a fully human life. There's much more in common than I think is often recognized. If you take, for example, the concept of treating others equally with respect, I don't think that's a particularly religious one at all. I think it's part of people recognizing their common humanity and what we owe as a result of that. But nonetheless, there will be things. I think, you see, when I did spend quite a lot of time in Pakistan, and I used to enjoy the time when it was called for prayer. Because I felt, though Christian, I felt really inspired by that call for prayer, and by realizing that maybe their prayer life was very much like a Christian prayer life at its best. That there was there in the liturgy a respect for that which is holy, and which transcends this world. And so I really felt a great deal of liking for what I was hearing, what I was attending in the Muslim call for prayer. So I think that I would think that we ought to, and I think too, if you look at...
It's okay, it's just someone that has got taken their unmute off. Do continue, Richard.
Yes, and it's also the... I think in one or two of the latest papal encyclicals, I forget which one it was now, that starts talking about we all Christians belong to the Church of Christ. Now, within that Church of Christ, there will be the Roman Catholic Church, there will be the Anglican Church, there will be the Methodist Church, there will be and so on. But you're seeing even within the Roman Catholic Church now a sort of deeper regard and concern for the other Christian faiths, and what they have in common is possibly more important than what separates them. This is a really interesting move forward.
I think that's incredibly helpful, Richard, and I think when we start to listen to each other, we recognize a commonality in that God loves all people. And that seems to be really key in all faiths. And I think that for God to love us, we make mistakes. And of course, God doesn't. God's perfect. And so when God asks us to love us, when God loves us, he loves that is different to him or to God. And maybe when we love each other and we're different, we are experiencing a tiny amount of the kind of love God has for us. Because it must be pretty difficult to love sinners when you're perfect, I would imagine.
Yes.
Does anyone have any other questions for Richard?
I have a question.
Oh, thank you, Mayssa.
According to my experience in the classrooms and in the Middle Eastern context specifically, how do we explain to children in the classroom about accepting other people's religion when we have people in authoritative positions like political leaders instigating religious tensions and hatred and sectarianism and all forms of not accepting others?
Well, I think these are issues which need to be raised, I think. I mean, this is all part, I think, of that kind of public, I say public in the classroom, discussion, raising these people who really find it very difficult, and then seeing what are the other answers that other people will give, and a real debate about that. I mean, I do think that if I've understood it, it's a bit difficult trying to hear clearly, but if I've understood what was being raised, is that what one gets very often in between religions is itself a generation of generating more hatred than actual love. And one sees at the present moment what is happening in Northern Ireland, for example, is quite terrifying. And I'd have thought that makes it all the more important that there should be the kind of classroom debate, well organized, marshaled, there is an absolute rule on not despising what another person says, not laughing at them, not jumping down their throats, but trying to understand, but also pressing them for evidence, and how that kind of interreligious dislike or indeed hatred can possibly be justified by their religious principles. And I think Northern Ireland produces a very interesting case of where this kind of discussion and debate, systematically pursued on a regular basis, is absolutely crucial. And of course, there are schools which were set up in Northern Ireland specifically for that purpose, interdenominational schools.
Yes, thank you very much.
We have Rahiq Al-Samarra'i. She would like to ask a question. Tfadli, Rahiq.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mr. Richard.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, go ahead with your question for Professor Richard Pring, Rahiq.
Okay, I'm just having a question about how to apply these ideas and methods in the very traditional.
Hello?
Systems. I mean, a teacher standing in the beginning of the class. Can you hear me?
Rahiq,
Yes,
can you
I can hear you, yes.
repeat your question, because it was your voice was breaking out a bit.
Oh, okay. I was asking about how to apply these ideas and methods in the very traditional education systems. And when I say a traditional education systems, I mean the teacher standing in the beginning of the class and just focusing on knowledge and informations more than focusing on the students' attitudes. So how we can apply these tips or ideas?
I think that it's a long-term thing, isn't it? It's something which has to start very, very early. And I think that I could imagine people who come from, let's say, minority religious position, must feel rather threatened when they come into an atmosphere which there isn't that sort of interest or knowledge about or concern for them. So I think that if one's seeing the distinctively religious aspect of this, then I think there have to be opportunities. And I've actually put this too. For example, I'm on the trustee of the Aga Khan Centre in London. And at the last trustee meeting, I produced a paper based on the Commission for Religious Education, in which one would like to see in all schools representatives of the different religious bodies, especially the minority ones, in which they will have their own specialists coming into the schools and explaining and showing the good side of that particular sort of religious view. The liturgy, for example, which I was always impressed with when I moved into the various mosques, etc., and to the different religious bodies. So I think it requires in schools, on the religious questions, rather than more general ones that I was talking about, religious questions, I think it requires representatives of the different religious bodies to be invited in on a, when I say regular basis, it can't be a weekly basis because there just isn't time in the timetable, but nonetheless, periodically, but systematically, to come in and show the whole class, whether they belong to that religious body or not, what is it that's so special about them and about their view, their religious views, and about their way of life. And after all, there is, go back to the history of most of these religious groups, a great deal of common between, say, Christianity and Islam, and particularly between the different Christian bodies, etc. So I think we've got to seek out what is common, even if the differences remain, such that there is a respect for each other and a learning from each other. And I think it can be achieved, and I've seen it in schools. But it needs to be systematically organised. That's one of the things I'm trying to promote.
It sounds like this is more than a tip for teachers, Richard. This sounds like a purpose of education to create cohesive communities that respect one another.
Yes, yes. And at different levels. And the education needs to take place at the adult level as well, of course. But it's got to begin in schools. Hello?
Hi. So, Richard, I don't know if you have time to stay with us for a little while, but we do now move on to the discussion section. And the discussion section, we're going to ask colleagues to really think about what was a really enjoyable dialogue that you had with your child, and how do you recall that dialogue? And so that's the first question in the chat. We want you to reflect on a good dialogue you had with your child.
Yeah. Look, Alison.
Yes, Professor Richard.
I've got another engagement coming up. I wasn't expecting to be with you all the time.
Yes, that's fine, but we'll go on to the discussion now.
Yes,
and what I would like to do...
I am sorry I can't work the Zoom. I do apologise.
Thank you so much.
I've reached an age in which it's all a terrible mystery. Even when you say use the browser, I begin to think twice, what the hell is a browser? Right? But I can use the telephone.
Thank you so much, Richard.
Okay then. Right, God bless.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So colleagues, if you would like to perhaps share or recall personally what a good dialogue you had with your child was, and then thinking about what Professor Richard Pring said about the conditions. He talked about physical conditions in the classroom, but also the attitudes that people had. If you could share what were the conditions that led to that good dialogue, and if you're willing to maybe share in this discussion, please raise your hand.
I would like to go first.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I would recall different types of dialogues that I had either with my students or with my own daughter. So with my daughter, I felt like the best time to speak to her is after she has eaten and she's rested from school and and she's spaced a bit from all the orders, around her, and from all the requests and all from all the demands. And I would think about a dialogue when she felt like she's because she changed schools recently and changed countries as well. So this has been very challenging for her because she doesn't have friends anymore. So she comes back to from school. She doesn't talk to anyone. She stays alone most breaks. So so what I try to do is to ask her how she feels about it and if she's okay or not okay with it. And I try not to tell her you should put more effort in trying to make friends, rather than and try to tell her that if she's okay now not having friends and not putting so much effort, and that's fine, it is okay. Because also we always think that it is not right not to have friends, but if she doesn't have for some time and she doesn't want to put the effort, I think we should leave our children to make their own choices and decisions when they feel that they are well to make these decisions. So I think the right conditions would be is that not to step into their zone when they're not ready to talk, because we would rather let them talk rather than we just always telling them what to feel and how to think. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Kathleen, please. Unmute yourself, Kathleen.
Yeah.
Right. I was interested in that point because I mean, one, I'm not a teacher, and two, I've got 2 adult children now and 1 very small grandchild. So the question of when to speak and a good dialogue with the child. My granddaughter's 16 months old, so the dialogue isn't there so much as the sort of the emotional relationship and emotional dialogue when she's doing something or trying to do something, or we're trying to initiate her first forays into language. But I was listening to what Mayssa was saying about, you know, the best time to speak to a child, and I always worked. So my child was, both of my children were with a childminder initially when they left, you know, when they finished school for the day, and I always felt as if I lost out on that, and that those sweet spots of conversation and dialogue with them, because they went from school to the childminder, and the point at which you could get that, you know, that degree of conversation was to some extent lost, because you weren't getting them fresh from school when the experiences were still fresh in their mind. And I suppose the other thing for me was that the relationship that I have or had with them as children was obviously a different one from the relationship they had with their teachers in the school setting. So the way in which they would engage, you know, would be different for, you know, for obvious reasons. And you know, I suppose I've reflected on that over, you know, over the years, and you know, it's obviously, it would have been something I would have liked to have revisited, but you know, it's too late to do that now. But it's something that is in my head as I see my grandchild develop and move into the next stage of her life, and you know, where she moves on when she eventually starts school. But that's something that I will reflect to my own daughter, her mother, to be mindful of, and understand that the dialogue will be different at different times, and for, you know, very simple reasons, and not to feel challenged by that as a result.
Mayamin, yeah.
It's brilliant listening to Mayssa, what she was saying, and Kathleen, and the different concepts, you know, of talking to your child. I have been a teacher for more than 23 years, so I was a school teacher in the UK, and then I had to, like Kathleen did, had a childminder, so I would leave the school. It wasn't a childminder, it was after school club, and then dragging them out of that school club, taking them home. But I made sure that I would sit down around the table and ask them questions, and looking at the dialogue. And now when I reflect on me talking to my children, that was my daughter would rattle. We would just talk, and then it was very hard for my son to get anything out of him. Literally, I would just ask him and he'd just give me yes or no. So that dialogue was so hard to get out of him. Are you okay? Did you do this? Yeah. Was it good? But it's making that child talk and making him speak what he felt. That was so hard for me to understand. Being a teacher, I would go to the children, I'd understand what's going on. When it came to my child, it was so difficult. Another thing that I felt is, as a mother, as a Middle Eastern mother now, Mayssa is going to go through the same thing that I'm going now, is bringing my culture and bringing the British culture and trying to put them together and making my daughter or my son unique. And that was so hard for me as a mother, as a Middle Eastern mother who was born and brought up in the UK, and bringing that culture to it, and then giving them their own identity. So the dialogue is, why should I do what you said? Why should I be like an Arab or something? We're living in the UK. Why should I speak Arabic? These dialogues makes you think for a second and reflect a little bit, and you think, okay, I need to explain to them, okay, they're children. Do I speak to them as a child? Do I speak to them as an adult? How do I bring that language to those children, making it clear for them, this is why, this is because, this is how we should do it. And I'm still, my children, both of them, alhamdulillah, both of them are at uni. And now I'm dealing with young adults again here, talking to them as young adults. Again, you're trying to look for the language, the terminology, the dialogue of sitting down with them and talking to them about their life at uni. Again, we as parents, we want to think, what is the language? What is the dialogue? How do we make them talk? How do we make them think? How to make them unique, have their own identity, have their own confidence, instead of giving them the words, giving them, like Mayssa said, and like Kathleen said, giving them the words and then them to think and react. I think that's all I can say about me and my experience with dialogue and talking to the children. Thank you.
Are there any other contributors? David Season, you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute? Did you have a question, David?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Yeah. First, thanks, Dr. Mayamin, for inviting me to this. It's really interesting dialogue and interesting people. I mean, the way that you've just mentioned about your children, this is really amazing. The thing about like child dialogue, this is a massive area. I think from my viewpoint, the best thing to do is to know your child better. Simple. So certain specific questions in life about the child's life, the child dreams, emotions, and values can help us know and understand this person we are raising. It can also give us clues about things we might want to work on with our children by simply asking them about who are their best friends, why are they their best friends, what are the features do they think or they look for in a friend, why do they think is, or what is the most important quality in their friends or in people in general. And important thing also to kind of like expand the dialogue into things about something that of their interest. I mean, what do they think about clothing styles, for example, popular today? What are the most embarrassing moments for them? Why do they feel those moments are embarrassing? I feel having this dialogue, kind of question and answer, befriending the children will help enhance the family relationship. I mean, the child needs to feel that they are an important member of the family. It can be interesting to get a sense of what the children think about being part of our family. Because when kids grow up, they often look at their friends' families or look at families on TV, and they ask questions. What would it be like if they were raised in a different family, or in that family on TV or in their friend's family? It can be an eye-opening to hear their thoughts about whether they appreciate their families, our family, I mean, and also things that they might wish to be different in our family as they start to compare with friends or with TV. So a lot of, I mean, this dialogue, I mean, all your contributions is brilliant. It helps in kind of getting into the right direction. So it's good always to have that chat with the children, to ask them questions in a very kind of like encouraging way. What is especially when they are growing a bit into a certain age, they start to comparing their family to other families. Like, what do they feel like the best thing in our family, or what does our family look like compared to others? What do we lack in our family? What do we want to do to make our family, for example, in their eyes, an ideal one? I believe all this will contribute to that. And when it goes to school, of course, that gives more responsibility, put more responsibility on teachers, because children at a certain age, especially in primary school, will ask teachers a lot of questions. Some of the questions teachers might feel they are kind of private or personal to the child's family. I believe we should be more open and kind of be more flexible to accept questions from children, and we deal with them the way we deal with our children. And this will create that atmosphere in the classroom, interactive atmosphere. The child will feel comfortable to walk into that classroom, to speak to that teacher about any subjects that come to their mind. It doesn't have to be related to the lesson itself, to life, because school is not only to raise children mentally, it's emotional, feeling, prepare them for life as well. That's all I wanted to say, and thank you very much for all your contribution. It's a really brilliant conference. Thanks a lot.
David, that was a really wonderful, wonderful understanding. And I think children, you say, ask their teachers a lot of questions, but if, as Khalida R. And I have written about, in neoliberalist approaches to education, we fill the curriculum with talking at children. I don't know to what extent there is space for children to ask questions and to feel they belong in the classroom, if they just feel they're there to be talked at. And it reminds me of Mayssa's PhD. I was privileged to start supervising with her about the flipped classroom that starts with children asking questions and inquiry. I don't know what people feel about that in the delegation. Kathleen, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I know it was interesting, the points that David was raising, and it brought to mind, I suppose, quite possibly the oldest in this particular Zoom meeting, so I've got some, generational experience in terms of this as an individual, not just as a parent. But when I was growing up, my first few years were at home with my mother, who didn't work because societally it wasn't expected that mothers worked at that point. So I had the first 5 years of my life with her, and both my father and my mother did a lot to support me in that time, particularly in terms of my very early learning, so that by the time I went to school I had some grasp of how to write my own name and to understand basic arithmetic. And that wasn't because they were particularly well educated, neither of them were, but they understood that there was benefit in doing that. And so I felt safe in that environment, and able to reflect to them what I was doing once I started school. But life has changed, society has changed, and there's an expectation that both parents work now. I'm not saying that that's always the case, but there's that expectation that both work. So societally, the family structure has changed quite dramatically over the last 20 or so, 30 years, because there's not the same link with the parent, in that first five years of life. And so the change, and it was back to what I was saying earlier about the relationship between the child and a teacher and the child and a parent, has changed over time as well. So the way in which we engage with children has to be different now. In addition to that, and certainly from my own experience, and this was more come through my own area of work before I retired, that we're probably now reaching a point where we're going back to, I don't know, first principles, where the child is almost has to be the centre of everything that we're doing as a family, as a society. I work in my own experience of, as I say, my granddaughter, and she has the absolute delight in having a great grandfather and a great grandmother from both sides of the family who are delighted with her, and and seeing that that first few months of her life and how she's developing. But the different experiences that each level of the family have had in terms of engaging with a child at that age, and how how they develop towards moving into the school setting is different. And so you bring different experiences to that child's life as well. I can see her personality developing already, you know, what she likes, what she doesn't like, her reaction to things, simple things like a television programme in CBeebies, for example. And my apologies to colleagues who are not familiar with that particular television channel. She's already being selective in what she wants to watch. And she has a great interest in music and particular singers. She wants to hear things repetitively because she enjoys the rhythm or the voice. And she's very clear already that if she doesn't get what she wants, she will tell you quite clearly that she's not happy with you. And she's not reached that terrible twos stage, but she's getting very close to it. But she's also very quick to be brought back to her own sunny nature and will engage with you as well. But she's got a means to communicate already through just giving kisses and cuddles. I was leaving her house the other day, and we've been going through a bit of a tense time in relation to my own father and his health. And my daughter gave me a hug, and she was holding my granddaughter at the same time, and the little one just put her hands out and hugged me as well. And those non-verbal signs give me strength that she is going to be a good communicator in her future life. And we want to see that ability for all children to have that, feel that safeness in the people that they are with. Okay, we might not necessarily want them to hug their teachers, unless of course the parent gives the permission for that to happen. But it's something that children need to feel safe in order to be able to engage at all. And that's a really important point that I think we've got to not lose sight of.
That is really important, and it reminds me of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when the bottom rung is to feel safe and to have needs met, which your granddaughter is beginning to express. But then that moves us on to belonging, that sense of belonging, and when you really feel confident you can ask questions. And may I bring Hong in here to, Hong, do you have a question? Would you like to unmute yourself, please? Perfect, thank you.
My question just now, we had a really good discussion. We talked about religious study. We talked about what are the good times to talk with your own children. My question is, because currently we are still strongly influenced by the current situation. And I think some of them, even, we are adults, but we still feel we are under pressure, we are under, we are suffering from anxiety. And how about, teenage children? Teenage children this time, especially for young people from 16 to 23. And my whole feeling, I think they really suffered a lot. Also including my, my own son. Currently, he's studying, a high school which has very high reputation. But I think, he's suffering from peer pressure. Also, he is suffering from, the long time he just keeps himself in his own bedroom. I think, this time he should enjoy more happy time with his friends. But in the current situation, just stops him from doing all these things. I just think, as educators or as parents, how we can do to help these young people. And just a couple of months ago, I even got email from the headmaster from my son's school. One 17-year-old boy, he even killed himself from I mean, serious depression. I just want to say, you know, for teenage children or young people, I think recently suffered a lot. I think this may be a long-term, you know, influence for them. And I just say, how can we think seriously about young people's mental health? I think this is a very important issue. We all know we need to be inclusive. I mean, towards different kinds of religious study, and we need to make our children to be, I mean, critical thinker, independent thinker. But just under the current whole economic situation or their living environment, how can we help these young people? Probably also some of us, I want to say, we may also need to help ourselves.
Hong, I think that is absolutely crucial, and I really want to thank you and everybody for their vital contributions, because I always remember when you're on an aeroplane, when we used to fly, they say put your oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on your child. So I do think we need to take care of ourselves. And I think that's why the International Consortium for Empowering Young Societal Innovators for Equity and Renewal wanted to launch this first journal with Mayssa, with Mayamin, with Elizabeth Bradley Adams and Daniela Canfarotta and yourself, Hong. And what we really wanted to do was help people think through, how do we work our way out of COVID-19 in the recovery, supporting our children. And so I think Mayssa developed a framework, and what we'd like to do now, if we may, is present maybe 4 steps towards what we think may be useful and that you can apply to developing good dialogues with your children, that we can offer with credibility, because we do recall, in a context of nation states that are at war or suffering violence, uncertainty, chaos and ambiguity, that they need to be able to see that this is going to give them hope, that this is useful, that this is about building societal, community and economic well-being, propelling entrepreneurial communities for renewal in the COVID-19 recovery, and that it can be used. And so if I can go first to our colleague Mayamin, if you'd like to give us the first stage of the 4 stages, if I can share my screen and give it, can you take the screen? And then this will lead to our next discussion. Thanks, Mayamin. Oh, you need to unmute yourself, please. I've made you a co-host, so I can't do it. That's it.
This is me all over again. I keep forgetting to unmute myself, so I don't talk a lot. We were thinking about how we can build a dialogue and how we can make students in the schools be creative thinkers by thinking about the 4 C's, which is making students in the classroom become a critical thinker, know how to talk, which is dialogue that we've been talking about all morning with the Professor Richard, and we had the family dialogue that we were talking about just now, and we made people think about the dialogue and how we talk to our children. Not only that, as we are teachers, we need to think about the dialogue that we use in schools. So to make our students talk and be critical thinkers, so we use the Mayssa's framework, which is the 4 C's by Dew in 1997. When he discussed it, to be a great critical thinker, you have to have good skills. So that means you have to have ways of good questioning. You have to have critical thinking. You have to have good questioning. You have to have communication skills, which brings back to thinking about How do we do this? Especially now we are living in the 21st centuries, and our teachers need to be armed with these 4 C's. That means critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and being creative. And if we do that through influencing our teachers, that means it will reflect on our students. And if we have good teachers, we're going to have good students. And then if we have good students, this will influence and this will reflect in our community, and will go back to the school again. And then you have a beautiful society. And this is what we are looking for. My first part, which I'm going to be talking about, is how to have good questioning skills. So Dewey relates, he talks about questioning when he says, when you have a child and you want them to be a critical thinker, and critical thinking comes up as thinking in inquiry basis. So that means you have to have an investigation, and then you have to turn it over, and then you're thinking about how to deliver this critical thinking, how you're going to make it more clear. So this means you need to look at a good question. So as a teacher, I would stand up and say, okay, how I'm going to make my children be critical thinkers, that means I need to know and be creative on how and what and why and where. So these are the questioning, the good questioning skills. So you as a teacher should be armed, should be thinking of what are these questions that I need to ask like we said a few minutes ago, ask my children. Now it's ask my students in the classroom. So when I want to have a problem-solving skill and make my students be more aware of what they are doing or what is around them, is bringing an open-ended question. So the child you would give them a question, and then you would make them think about that question, and they would come up with more and more questions, because that's the only way that you're going to stimulate that child and make them think. Of course, Dewey talked about a lot of, not only when the child asks that question, are you going to answer? Are you going to say, okay, or is it not? So thinking about the question is that you are going to open a question. You're going to give little hints. That means you're giving them small and small questions. And then you make them try to think about these questions. And in that problem that you have brought into the classroom. When I'm talking about a problem, it's just that thinking about 1 + 1. So if you're teaching students to add 1 + 1, so you're telling them, okay, if I've got one apple, another apple, so how does this 1 + 1 make 2? So that by asking that how, you made that child think. Okay, so that question is how, then he starts to think, okay, can I use my 2 fingers? Can I use 2 apples? Can I use 2 figures, 2 things? That is the way that these questioning come up to a child. Don't make that child just go, okay, give them, you spoon feed them and give them the answer straight away. But remember, as a teacher, is the question that opens that child's mind, opens that child to the critical world, to make them an individual thinker. I know that 1 + 1 = 2, but how am I going to get to that 2? So how are you going to get to that 2 is a question. So Dewey says, you as a teacher need to think, you need to reflect on how you're going to make that child think. How are you going to make that child think of ways of making them more a critical thinker? And then using that critical thinking makes them communicate well and makes them work with their colleagues, because you started with a very good question. And we come back to the Middle East, okay? And we lack this, especially I'm going to talk about the Iraqi situation, and here where I work in Qatar as well, Qatar University, and I'm looking at schools in Qatar as well. We see that we bring them we have to have the 4 C's in the classroom. You have to have critical thinking in the classroom. You have to have the communication. You have to be a creative person. You have to know how to work with each other. But, okay, how are we going to make those children do that? And how are we going to make that teacher do that? Then we bring back the teachers and we tell them, you need to think about ways of asking. the question. And that means we make them, first of all, the teacher needs to ask the question, leave the children for 1 minute to think about the question on their own. So that is thinking on their own, and then bringing them to the group work and making them think about that question, because you brought that question and you made it so easy, so clear for them to think about. That's the way that they can move on by thinking of how to find solutions for that question. So Dewey and with Mayssa's framework, we started to think about ways of using the best way to use the language when it comes to asking questions, the way that you are going to interpret the way that you want the students to think about your question. So the questions means that when you bring in a good question, it's different when you are discussing this with primary school children, and it's going to change the questions when you're talking about secondary school children. And again, it changes when you're talking with people who are in high school questions. And at the same time, it changes with us as university lecturers. We change our questioning and our way of asking questions and making our students more of a critical thinker. And that means we as teachers are developing the way that we ask questions. So Dewey says, if you want a child to be a critical thinker and to make them very good in their society, you need to come up with good questioning. I think that's 5 minutes, or is it less or more? I don't know. I don't want to talk too much. I'll leave the floor for my next colleague. I think it's Daniela. And Daniela, we have a podcast for her. Brilliant.
Alison, we can't hear the... Can you hear the recording? Alison, you're muted.
Of the thousands.
If you can, yes, thank you.
Good morning to all dear parents. To develop critical thinking in children, in addition to being able to ask good questions, it is important to develop the ability to solve problems. Think of the thousands of small problems of everyday life, especially those related to studying at school. Let's ask ourselves, how do we help children feel capable of solving problems? How many of us, when children ask for help with their homework, do not hesitate to find solutions to make their life easier? However, Dewey suggests a 5-step path to not replace them in solving the problem. First, we need to help them bring out the good questions around the perceived problem. We need to understand how the children feel when faced with that problem. For example, we can ask them, how do you feel when you are faced with this difficulty? In this way, we put ourselves in the position of the listener and collect the story of their thoughts. We will often be amazed by the originality of their reflections, and the children realize that they have a thought of them. Baldwin heat reduces performance anxiety in the children and increases self-esteem. Second, we can help the children describe the problem and name what happens to them. Third, help them find all possible solutions to the problems without stopping at the first hypothesis. Fourth, develop all the parts of those hypotheses, thinking together about the consequences of the various solutions. Fifth, choose the best hypothesis to solve the problem. Remember, helping your children to solve a problem does not mean doing it instead of them, but patiently helping them to follow these 5 steps to overcome the experience of not understanding. In this way, you will help your children to overcome the fear of the problem, listening and accepting the difficulty, letting the originality and creativity of the solution emerge.
Oh, thank you, Daniela. And Daniela couldn't be with us this morning, but has been a crucial member of our team and wanted to share that part of Mayssa's framework. Hong, would you like to talk about collaboration, or would you like me to? Okay, so the next step, we've gone through asking good questions, and then we've gone through problem solving, which is about the questions, if they're well questioned, have half the solution in them. And what is absolutely crucial, I think, is putting the kinds of definitions for what the children are conceptualizing or how they're feeling to the words. So we want them to use their words to describe how they feel, what they're thinking. And I think as teachers, after the lockdown, when we've worked with children, we can see that particularly children with English as an additional language, when they're coming back to the classroom, they may not have had the chance to use those words as regularly as they would if they were in full-time classroom environment. And so getting them to use these words to describe things and then to put them in the right order logically, so that they can make sense of their feelings and what they're thinking. Because as Professor Tim Brighouse said, if we can expand a child's vocabulary, we can really help them mobilize their education for social mobility. So it really is not just about expanding the vocabulary, which is crucial, but it's also about helping them connect that language, the words they use, to their concepts and to their feelings so that they can describe them. And that is the first stage of being able to understand, which is giving and receiving communication and having their needs met. And we can work in collaboration with children, just as Daniela said, to help them give meaning to their words, to help them define how they feel, use the right words so that we're using a shared provisional understanding of what that word means for that child and what that word means for the parent. Because sometimes we can use a word and we have different understandings of what that word means. And that just needs clarification. And maybe that's something that we all need to do more of, which is clarifying, do we actually mean the same thing with the same word? And when we have different cultures coming together, people of all faiths and none, if we really want to celebrate cultural heritages and all faiths and none, we need to ensure that we mean the same thing by the same words. And if we don't, we need to seek collaboratively clarification so that we can give and receive communication. So using Mayssa's framework that she developed drawing on John Dewey, 1959, he refers to the importance of working towards a common goal. And so maybe these questions are about defining key words in those questions that map back to the common goal. What is it that we're trying to do? Are we trying to develop children's well-being, to develop a community of belonging so that they are open to learning? And if we're doing that, how can we break down this common goal into individual targets and have key performance indicators? Now, that's a lot for the children to think about, but we can help them evolve their ideas, their understandings, and be collaborative in enabling them and empowering them to express what they mean accurately so that we all understand each other using similar descriptions leading on to understanding. Because I think one of the key issues when we're trying to narrow achievement gaps based on race, on class, on gender, on special educational needs and disabilities, on any of the protected characteristics, is that we need to be able to define where those gaps are and why those gaps exist. And when we can define them, we can begin to understand them, and then we can begin to develop strategies together to develop communities that are cohesive as part of our problem solving together, map to the Sustainable Development Goals and peace and prosperity, because as our special edition journal identifies, there are many nation states experiencing war at the moment, and it has been a problem since the beginning of time, with very few years over the last 3,000-4,000 years of peace. So the collaboration is really about how are we developing a community that's inside together, looking at interacting within an environment in order to learn how to think and what that thinking means. And John Dewey emphasizes that collaborative learning is constructed within the social context, which is what Mayamin talked about, and why we read Mayssa's framework through the Italian education policy, the Iraq education policy, the Lebanon education policy, and the English education policy, because we wanted to understand how this legislation was being played out in the social context to empower young people to be critical thinkers and to ask good questions and to be able to challenge and hold people to account, for example, the government for delivering on their manifestos as they've promised in truth. And I remember Professor Richard Pring talking about a post-truth society and how can we bring this collaboration back to what are the warrants made? As Professor Stephen Gorard says, how can we know that the judgments being made are accurate? And that is why our journal is called a journal of groundwork cases for faculty of judgment. We're not saying we know what faculty of judgment is or what wisdom is. We're saying we're on a journey with and for society to discover that together and to find the thinking tools for us to critically evaluate and collaborate to discover and seek truth and to find the warrants for the claims made that are in the interests of the public when spending people's hard-earned cash as taxpayers. So just to sum up, in Dewey's view, a collaborative environment includes the spirit of free communication, as Kant says, about we fully and explicitly understand our participation in the social contract to the extent that we could have written it for ourselves. It does no harm for the self or the other. And as Rawls says, if we were going to be dropped into a society without knowing which class or which gender or which race or what any of the protected characteristics we were going to have, how would we create that society so that wherever we landed, we would have a fair chance of having a good life? So the notion of the individual helping the other in a collaborative atmosphere to interchange of ideas, suggestions, and results for individuals to do things in a social and cooperative way within educational contexts. So please do go back to the paper. It's on AlisonTaysum.com. It's our journal article using Mayssa's framework, and have a look at how you can apply these ideas. There's just 4 sections, B1, B2, B3, B4, to your child's dialogue. How is this going to be useful for you? That's why we're doing it. So it's useful with and for society to develop social and economic well-being. Therefore, for Dewey, collaboration is about solving problems together, an activity where individuals have the ability to work together empathetically to reach a common goal by communicating freely, thinking together, exchanging ideas, exchanging knowledge, and solving problems cooperatively within what Professor Richard Pring called a moral, which is the investigation into the ethical rules and the ethical dimension. And I was privileged to work with Qian about the understandings of Confucius, where when we have bureaucracies, you can predict in 5 or 8 generations' time the ethical rules that will still be there and the moral investigation in them, because law is built like a big ship, moves very slowly, and unlike neoliberalist approaches where the moral rules are just changed very quickly to short-term goals. So that's a little bit about collaboration. I'd now like to move on to Mayssa, if you could talk about the communication, which is part of your framework you developed for John Dewey's work.
Yes, thank you, Alison. Thank you, Mayamin, as well. I'm posting now a sentence that I have read earlier on the chat. Please thumbs up if you like it. Children are our most powerful hope for change. If we really want change, our children are our hope So if we keep this in mind whenever we enter the classroom, whenever we speak to young people, to our children, we keep this in mind that they are going to be the change if we are leading change. As for the communication part, things I have reflected on, we form relationships with our children based on communication. And in this new digital world and in the real world, our ability to communicate and listen has become very challenging for all of us. And this is what I want to talk about today, because strong relationships are built on strong communication. And critical thinking entails communication, especially when we're seeking our children's point of views and we're trying to extract information from them about how they are feeling. And I would like to refer to what Kathleen and Alison were saying about creating a safe place for them. Have we created, maybe you want to reflect, have we created a safe place for our children so that they come to us and they tell us about their feeling, rather than we are trying, you know, to trigger them to speak. This is something just we need to reflect on. And therefore language, and then I think Rahik was speaking about language and finding the proper words for our children to express themselves, so it becomes an integral part of our communication skills. John Dewey tells us that language is necessary for children to communicate their thoughts. So we ought to be careful not to ever underestimate the power of words that we use when we communicate with our children. As parents, and especially in the Middle Eastern context, I would like to repeat that we really want to feed our children with certain emotions. We want to tell them how they should feel. We want to tell them what they should do. And also as caring mothers and overprotective mothers, we tend to solve their problems. So, and this will present an impediment for them to start solving their own problems and have the ability to do that in the future. So what we actually need to do is maybe stop telling and start asking. And when we ask, we can listen attentively, and we have to listen actively to their feelings, emotions, and struggles, so that we are able to initiate discussion. So, for example, I can tell you one thing during the pandemic that happened in Lebanon, when we started going through lockdown, and students were really struggling to go online. Students were really struggling to do things. Children were struggling to do things. Parents tend to tell them, "Oh, we've been in worse. We've been in war. Why don't you just suck it up, do it, whatever. We've been in war. Don't stop complaining. You know, it's just a pandemic. It's fine. At least you don't have bombs over your head." Our children do not care what we have been through because they don't know it, not because they don't care. They don't know what we have been through. We need to not underestimate their feelings. We don't have to, and especially in our culture, in the Middle Eastern culture, we tend to tell them if they're feeling bad or if they have a headache, "Oh, I have a headache too. Oh, I've been worse." And we need to stop to do that because this is not about us. When they tell us things, it's about them. And I would recall the adult-centered, Alison, that we spoke about with Mayamin. It's always an adult-centered conversation we tend to have with them. So let's listen to our children attentively, and we are all guilty. I guess myself, I would say I'm guilty. Let's not talk to our children when we are busy, when we are on our phone, when we are on a laptop, when we are in the kitchen, when we are doing things, we're occupied with something else. Even if it's give them 10 minutes or maybe 1 hour, that is where they know that this is fully for them. This is when we start listening. This is when they know that we care, at least we are listening to them. So when we when we observe, and also another thing, and I'm really trying to refer to the context of communication, in which context and in which culture. We in our Middle Eastern culture, and this is really prevalent, we observe our children's behavior and we immediately jump to criticize them, to blame them, like, why you're doing this, why you're acting like the why. Instead, you know, when we tend to do this as parents, we want to stop and think, how does this help anyone? Really, just criticizing and blaming children for what they're doing, how does it really help? So I came to realize as a mother and as an educator that we really don't teach children, children teach us. And when we learn from them by listening to them, and that's how we understand their behavior. The more we listen, the more we gain deeper understanding about their feelings. And the last thing that I would like to say, and it's very difficult in academia to always bring this up, is we should be able to listen to our children not only with our ears, but also with our hearts. Listen with your heart and do it with love. It's very difficult to bring the word love in academia, but if we do things with love, I think we can get them to feel good, and we get them to make them feel safe.
I think that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you to Mayamin, to Daniela, and to Mayssa for presenting Mayssa's framework. And I've tried to sum up some of the key things that you said there, Mayssa, and also how you and Mayamin and Daniela read the education policies of Lebanon, Iraq, Italy, and I did for England through your framework to identify actually there are none of these competencies we've just talked about as policy as text, which Stephen Ball talks about. And if they're not there as policy as text, they start to be arbitrary if they're going to be policy as discourse in the classroom. And what our research has shown is that in elite private schools that are about 7% of the population that are disproportionately represented in the elite universities such as Oxbridge, they do have these pedagogies that are more power sharing, that are more about problem solving, that are more of the things that our state school children, I think, deserve if we understand them and we have the time to share that with our ITT colleagues, our initial teacher training colleagues in courses, to look at the philosophies, the psychologies and the ethics of trust in education. And this can propel, we hope, social mobility and social and economic well-being. So I'd like to now move on to the discussion that, having thought about the conditions of a good dialogue with children, this second discussion is really about what are your reflections on asking questions with your child now that you've listened to the Mayssa's framework drawn from John Dewey. Have you got any different ideas about the way you might ask questions? And I give that to the floor now. Please raise your hand if you have any.
Isra Al-Husseini had a question.
Yeah, could you unmute, please?
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
My question is, if I have an isolated child or student, how can I improve his or her relationships to interact with friends? Actually, if I want to be much more specific, if I have child with the issues about autism, how to make him to open up and have friends and the society, not only friends.
Well, I think David Season answered this question really well. I think it's really difficult. Maybe we need to look at the qualities of friendship. And I was privileged to be brought up to be trained as a Socratic dialogue facilitator. And one of the dialogues that's crucial is, what is friendship? And, you know, in a classroom where children get bullied, and as Professor Richard Pring talked about, you know, are we laughing at children? How are we taking them seriously? are we creating the conditions where we can explore crucial questions like what is friendship? And if we identify the qualities of friendship, can we choose the friends that we have that are going to be conducive to us living a good life, and we help them living a good life? Or are we accidentally choosing friends that hurt us, harm us? So I don't know, what do you think, putting it back to you, please, what do you think we could perhaps do in schools to help children discover, or for themselves, what good friendship is? What are the qualities of good friendship? I mean, David's got his hand up. David, would you like to come in there?
Yeah, just a quick one about Israel's, like in regard to autism. Of course, yeah, this is a really good question. How to encourage an autistic child to come out, to open up to the community, and even inside and outside the schools, to be honest. I mean, we all know that child autism normally can be promoted in the early age anyway. Behavioral intervention, like in the UK, there is the model or the technique that is used, which is the ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis. This is kind of a very effective technique used by UK schools. We have tried recently also to export this to some of the schools in the Gulf states, and with some differences in kind of cultural aspect, it is working. So for Isra, I mean, I don't know how old is your child, but simply is to address the main obstacles that the child facing, is a social, is emotional, is expressing themselves, and then using this model. I can share this model with Dr. Mayamin maybe, and she can just cascade this later on. And it is really effective, and we also send it to parents in the UK as well, which is helping a lot of people and answer a lot of questions, because this is a very wide kind of spectrum. Can I ask other questions in regard to the speakers, or shall I wait?
That would be good.
The floor is yours.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, Dr. Mayamin, thanks for your part. It was really interesting, and you hit the right tone in regard to creative thinking, and especially in the context or having the cultural differences. I mean, I'm overseeing like 7 international schools in Dubai, and the problem that head teachers always raise is we need to promote critical thinking, and one of the ideas is to make things a bit more harder for the child, not to give them like easy answers, and that can, or things that can be done in a short time. And we are faced, especially in Dubai, with a lot of complaints from parents about making things difficult for the children, and that this is not what they want. They want things to be simple, easy. We are kind of putting a lot of obstacles in the children's way to develop, because we can't always ask them to look at the bigger picture, don't get ready answers, use like contradictions when you want to think about any aspects. You have to be kind of like eccentric, to be honest, in certain way of thinking. Try to mediate what you are asked about. Use your imagination. They don't like that. And I know, Dr. May, you mentioned like in Qatar, where you work, maybe there's a similar thing in schools. We are trying to kind of balance things and try to make it in a way that kind of course, in the end, those are private schools and parents are clients. So we need to provide quality education, promote and develop the children's characters, the way they think, widen up their knowledge. But at the same time, we need to mind our business as well. So I don't know if there is any way that you are able to advise on this. This is one. Another thing, so let me just ask all my questions so I can just shut up to the end of the session. In regard to, Alison mentioned that to empower children to define gaps and create cohesive communities. This is another problem here when it comes to different communities. Again, we come to the context here. Do we have to use different mechanisms to different communities, different cultures on how to define gaps? I know like in the English culture, we have like set up kind of rules that we might follow in English schools and defining gaps for the community. Although we live in a multicultural community, but the mainstream of the school system is kind of like one. But when you go to different countries, different cultures, different stream of education, do we have to apply different mechanisms? And if we do have to do this, what about we are one world and one kind of like human origin? The third question to Mayssa in regards to the communication part, and I know Mayssa mentioned like that relationship with children through communication has become difficult in the digital age. But don't we think that digital age also made it easy to communicate with children? Children like media, social media, like the technology gadgets, and we can maybe use those to make communication more effective. Our children spend most of the time on their phones, on their tablets or laptops, and they feel that they communicate better with their friends and with others through these devices. So we might be able to use those devices, make it easy to communicate to us with the children. And also Mayssa mentioned that the situation in Lebanon where like in the pandemic, some parents try to tell their children, well, we've been into worse than this, so you have to kind of like accept it. I mean, yeah, in a way, I agree with those parents. We shouldn't, of course, kind of like bring our problems to children, but we have also to build that resilience in our children. Children should know that they cannot always get what they want as soon as they want it. It is important also to pass on that, well, in this age of like Amazon, Netflix, Spotify, Prime, and all those things, we have also to kind of like, yeah, things are easier for them, but we have also to build resilience by reminding them of lessons from the past and how parents went through a lot more difficulties by understanding, by resilience, by kind of listening to their parents, of course. It's kind of a generation. Yes, I agree, we shouldn't involve them in this, but at the same time, I think it's important to kind of like teaches children how to accept delayed gratification, and that will lead in the end to happier and healthier lives. Thank you very much all. Thanks a lot.
I think that is absolutely superb, how to accept delayed gratification, to look for long-term, not short-term. And if we could go straight to Mayamin, I think your first question from David was for you.
Yeah. Thank you, David, for these brilliant questions, and thank you for coming to this session as well. I know you're a very busy man and you're everywhere, and I'm glad we got you today and you're with us. I totally agree with you, because I worked in the Middle East with the British Council trying to promote critical thinking, which we lack in the UK in our schools as well. Like Alison was saying at her part about England and the UK, we still lack this. What I found is coming here to Qatar, and which I'm going to be doing with a lot of schools in Baghdad and Mosul, is trying to bring the parents into the schools. So bringing these parents to the schools and making them see how we teach, how we have a session from 9. Of course, in the Middle East, for Qatar, it's from 7:30 to 12:30. So trying to bring those parents from the beginning of the session, which is at 8 o'clock, till around 12, and let them see how the teachers work in the classroom, to making them understand how we are promoting critical thinking and making them understand what does critical thinking mean. The problem is that the families, parents do not understand that this is very important for their children to be not spoon-fed all the time, to make them understand that they need to think for themselves, especially in the primary. Then they go to the secondary, and then we find that again they lack the understanding of critical thinking and writing papers. And when they come to the universities, again we see that there is a big lack of for them to understand how to sit down by your own and read an article and then come back to us and explain the article, or come back to us and give us your point about an article, which I found when I was conducting my research, and hopefully the paper will come out very soon for you to look at and read. So one of the interventions that I thought of the last 3 years is bringing the families in and making them a child in the classroom, and making them, bringing them a problem and let them solve it and let them understand how we promote this. I think that's the only way that they can understand what we're doing is the best thing for their child. And at the end, and as you said, it's a business, and this business, their parents are paying money for their children to learn. So let them learn correctly instead of bringing private tutors to help out. So that means you're wasting money. And that's something that I've been speaking about in the last 2 years in conferences in MENA, talking about how we can promote better education in the classroom and taking that education from the classroom to the home and then bringing it back to the classroom again. I hope that I'll send you the paper when it's finished, and if there's anything that is not clear, please do call me or send me an email. I can make it more clear for you. Thank you, David.
Well, that's a very comprehensive answer from Mayamin. David's given it the thumbs up. So just briefly to address the second question for me, which was how do the children identify the gaps? I think it's really for the adults to do this. And I think what I've tried to say is over the last 21 years of the research excellence framework in the UK, the exercise where we try to judge the impact of research, we've seen the gaps between poverty, between the rich and the poor, racial gaps, black-white achievement gap, gender gaps, they've widened. And I think what we could perhaps start to do is define issues of institutionalized racism. For example, I've just put in the chat here, there is a paper that The Guardian says essentially what we are doing is making it 5 times more likely for a child from Afro-Caribbean background in England to be excluded. So when we have that kind of real institutionalized racism, what are we actually doing to stop it? And I think before we can stop it, we need to identify it, and we need to benchmark data to say, well, are we reducing the number of skewed exclusions for children of colour, for BAME children? And when we start to define that, we begin to see strategies that I'm documenting at the moment that have come from colonialism, which is divide and conquer. And that is that when I'm in a classroom and I see children from different nation states, their children go to different mosques, the families like some children, the families don't like other children. So the teachers have already got an issue with parents outside of the school being friends or not friends. And that is even before we say all of these children who are BAME but have tensions between them, there are also issues to do with them all experiencing institutionalized racism. So unless we actually start to define what these issues are, we can't really understand them. And until we understand them, we can't really put in the change strategies with the impact factors that will, bring economic well-being and narrow these achievement gaps. So I think that's what I was saying. And maybe it's not so much the children's role to define how they're being discriminated against, particularly minority children, but it's the adults' role to identify that. And I think that universities have a massive role to play in this, but they need to be heard. and the knowledge that is being generated with communities and for communities needs to be workshopped with policymakers so they understand it, and we start to track how they implement the impact in their policies so that it is beneficial for human evolution, as Professor Richard Pring talked about earlier about the humans. So Kathleen, do you want to just come in there before we go on to Mayssa's answer? Can you unmute, please, Kathleen, because we can't hear you. Thank you.
Tell I'm out of practice with this, having retired last year. I was thinking about what David had said about, you know, the sort of, you know, a challenge that things are easier for the next generation. I don't think they are easier. I think that the challenges aren't less, they're just different. Because of different societal pressures and you know, the different circumstances we live in, COVID being the most immediate one that we're having to deal with across, you know, all of our lives. There is a challenge there for children and young people and how they are having to deal with not being in the classroom with their colleagues and having to learn from home, and how they interact with teachers through online teaching provision, and the way in which the attempt is now to try and get them back into the classroom for some or all of the school day. But I think we can't lose sight of the fact that whether we like it or not, things like social media, things like IT are with us now and will continue to be with us for you know, generations to come, because that's the way life is going to move. Apologies for reflecting on my experience with my grandchild, but she already knows, because she watches, how to manipulate information on a telephone, you know, with a touch screen. Even if she's not actually getting what she wants, she knows how to do that, and that will be there now, you know, and we will see that continuing, you know, for perpetuity, I think. I absolutely agree that the whole thing about critical thinking is vital, because if we don't move to that, we're just going to end up, you know, creating generations of same, where as you say, you know, we can't spoon feed children forever. We've got to give them the skills to manage, to think about things themselves and come to their own conclusions. And I think you're right. I mean, and I don't think that the issues around parents and how you engage them in what's happening in the classroom, I think it's a challenge for everyone. I know in Scotland, and listening to my husband, who is in the education system there, you know, they've said for years it's very difficult to bring every parent into a school to listen to how their child is progressing. And there's all sorts of ways in which, you know, the school will attempt to try and improve that engagement with parents, and it's not easy, and I don't think it will get any easier. I was going to say something about the issues around exclusion. I know that, again, in Scotland, through previous work that I did, that there's a definite push to try and reduce the number of exclusions, and I know that exclusions happen for different reasons, and there's definitely a focus on taking a child where issues have arisen, taking them not out of the school entirely, but taking them out of the pressured situation, whatever it is, and giving them an opportunity to draw breath, and then bringing them back in and then reintroducing them into the classroom to ensure that they're still, you know, maintaining their levels of learning. I can't say any more than that because I'm not a teacher, so it's just really what I've listened to in terms of policy development. But you know, the everything that I've heard this morning, while it's not been, I suppose it's maybe I've come at this from a slightly different perspective, but I think there's been an awful lot of common sense said this morning. I don't know whether anyone's looked at Scottish education system. I'm not saying it's perfect, but there's been a lot of development in the last few years that I think is worth reflecting upon. It would be interesting to hear where all this conversation goes in terms of any future workshops that take place.
I think the policy in Scotland is very exciting, and the changes that have been mapped there in the way leaders have more autonomy, professional educators have more autonomy, the critical thinking is very exciting. Yeah, I think we do need to do a workshop and look at the differences between England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, and try to learn from each other. Mayssa, are you able to come back to David's question?
Yes, yes. First, David, thank you for the thought-provoking questions. Regarding the digital world, yes, definitely, I agree with you 100%, because we can imagine in a world of pandemic and we can't reach our students, or we can't even have this meeting and discuss things. Definitely, it has helped a lot. But at the same time, my experience when I was teaching online was a very challenging one, when you have students behind cameras where they're muted and the videos is off and you're trying to teach. It is very difficult. It was a very challenging situation, because you can't get to see what they're doing and how they're feeling. And if you see, for example, in my classroom, if I see someone who's isolated, not working, I would come and sit beside them and try to work with them and try to engage them. So this is where I come from when I'm speaking about the digital world, and it's also in the real world. And it's not only in the digital world that we were challenged with communication. And especially when you know, young people are very excited about social media and pictures and all of it, and it's really taking them a bit from us, you know, and just they're always occupied with their phones. And this is what made it challenging for me, I'm saying. And regarding, and I hope I'm answering the question, but also regarding involving our children with what happened before. Yes, definitely, I agree with you. We should. I am a mother who, during the Israel war in July 2006, I had to go with my 6-month-old daughter with a bag just full of diapers and milk rather than clothes, and I had to go in a taxi to a place where a bus could pick me up and take me to Syria, and take me then to, and I had to take another car to Jordan, and I had to fly from Jordan to Egypt, and all of this over 48 hours. I had to do this with a 6-month-old daughter, and I explained this to her. But what I meant is not to dismiss their feelings, not to underestimate what they're going through now. We can tell them, but not rate it, not this, what I went through is 8 and what you're going through is 8/10 and what you're going through is 6/10. Just not try to say, I am more and you're less, or I'm less and you're more. And I hope this clarifies what, because I always tell my daughter and my students as well, count your blessings, whatever you're going through during the pandemic. Some people do not have food, some people do not have shelter, some people do not have access to public health, some people cannot even buy medicine, and especially in Lebanon, I would tell you, some people are dying at the doors of hospitals. Some people are refused to be admitted when they have COVID-19. These things, that's what we need to tell our children, to count their blessings. But at the same time, I cannot just dismiss her feelings, that she's locked up, as Kathleen said, she's locked up in a room, as Ati and Hong said, she's locked up in a room at the end of the day, all day, trying to, you know, learn online and trying to keep herself busy as much as she can. But at the end of the day, how much can she really keep herself busy? She's bored at the end of the day, no matter how much, you know, we give her as material, like a laptop, an iPad or whatever, or take her out on a road trip. At the end of the day, they need to interact with their friends. They need to be in the classroom. They need to be out there doing activities. My daughter loves drama. She can't act anymore. So these are difficult, but yes, they are not as difficult as a child who does not have food on the table at the end of the day.
Brilliant. Well done, Mayssa. To the
I
point.
think that's absolutely crucial, and it reminds me of Dr. Rini Saran's experience, as she's written in Mary Saran, her mother's book, about, you know, being taken over the border in a cardboard box as a baby, and you had 48 hours to get your child to Egypt via Syria and Jordan. And this is the impact of war that we absolutely have to stop, for peace and prosperity for all. And that, you know, now we have this pandemic as well. I've put in the chat that, you know, people in experiencing violence, uncertainty, chaos and ambiguity are not being admitted to hospitals without medicine, and if they have COVID-19. And this is the reality. So when we are talking about these things, we can do so with credibility, because these are the sorts of skills that will empower the children of war-torn countries with the ability to build and rebuild, but they need to have a fair chance to do that. And how we do that is eradicating poverty, and there are strategies for doing that. And maybe we need to start connecting classrooms up between different countries so that we can learn and have dialogues with each other to understand our different experiences. And then, as I think Professor Richard Pring talked about, and certainly John Dewey talked about, empathetically perhaps developing ways. So this is now the conclusion to the workshop. And I think a takeaway is that we can apply in our dialogues with our children the ability to develop their confidence rather than rate our experiences with their experiences, as Mayssa said so helpfully, and look for ways in which we stop criticizing, as David Season says, and we can start to develop their well-being and their learning and their happiness, and start to look at the qualities that are important in character and how are we developing those through dialogue. We will be having another workshop, and what we'd really like you to do is, you have my email address and you have the email address of our colleagues. If you'd like to just drop us a line to say the kinds of things you'd like to talk about in the next workshop, and then we can start to put that together and have ways in which it's more led by you rather than by us. But this is an introduction to this. Would you like to have any final words, Mayssa, Mayamin?
Yeah, I'd like to thank all my colleagues today, and thank you, Kathleen, David Season, Isra, and Ruqayya, I think. I'm sorry if I forgot anybody else's name. And hopefully we're willing even to take this workshop in Arabic if the teachers want that. So we'll have our colleagues talking in English, and I'm willing to be at the back translating this in Arabic. So if you want something like this and in our language, in Arabic language, we're willing to do that. Thank you again for all my colleagues who participated today, and I don't see them. They're behind the screens. So thank you very much. Have a lovely and Ramadan Mubarak. رمضان مبارك على الجميع إن شاء الله، ويكون خير وبركة علينا، وإن شاء الله إن تنزاح من الأمة هذه الكوفيد وتصير خير، ونشوفكم إن شاء الله السنة الجاية ونزاحت منها هاي كل الأمراض. Thank you.
And in Chinese, Bao Zhong. Would you like to say something? Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I would like to thank everyone who attended, and that especially with the contributions that you've made, and also this dialogue made me reflect on so many things that I have thought about, and I did, and I think I would like to restate something Kathleen said. I think it's the ongoing reflection on our dialogue with our children and with each other. So this is what I'm taking now from this, is like we can always reflect all the time what went right and what went wrong, and try to improve on it. And thank you for this opportunity. This is a great opportunity, and I hope we can have more events like this.
Tika. Хорошо. Merci bien. And спасибо. So yes, I think it would be wonderful to share our different languages and celebrate our diversity. So please get in touch. Thank you to everybody who kindly registered today. I hope it's been useful, and I look forward to working with you again in the future. Thank you, colleagues and friends.
Thank you.